I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the roll call, Emo Geddes is not here. He's got an excused absence. And he was here for closed session. And that's why the votes on some two things that I have to report out of closed session later on in the agenda will reflect all five of us being present. The agenda has been reviewed. There's no changes. Special presentations, superintendent's report.
Yeah, good evening, board and ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming tonight. I wanted to take a few minutes just to highlight some of the things that have taken place across the district since our last board meeting. Always a lot of things taking place at this time of the year. If you've never seen a soup opera, it is one of the cutest things you'll ever see in your life. These are transitional kindergartners from Mrs. Bullington's class at Cray that did it and did a video performance also for their families. So it's a great opportunity to go see that. I wanted to acknowledge the turkey trot, but start off by acknowledging board member Gursky, who was out there on Thanksgiving morning cooking pancakes for over 1,500 participants. So thank you for doing that. And then just acknowledge what a great event it was. I think the latest total was that they raised over $50,000 for Brentwood schools and athletic programs between us and Liberty. And so those monies will go to help support increases in sports equipment and uniforms and PE equipment. And so lots of great things that come as a result of that. I want to acknowledge Miss Sisney, who's a second grade teacher out at Pioneer. Her students got together and made posters and did a presentation to the lunch ladies over at Pioneer, just thanking them for the difference that they made in their lives, and got together and posed for a picture with them. I thought that was a really nice thing to do. It's nice to see some things coming back that have been tradition. This is the Bristow Middle School, one of the winter concert nights that was split over a couple of days. And just want to acknowledge Mr. Morello and the other band teachers who've been working hard to keep these programs running and strong. Also, all of our schools across the district, along with other businesses and government entities, are collecting for the Brentwood Regional Community Chest this year, mostly focused on toys and a full Thanksgiving dinner for hundreds of families in our area. And so our schools have been collecting. This was Loma Vista, where they set a goal to collect 500 and had already collected 400 toys by December 9th. And so I'll show you a picture later on where you can see where a lot of those toys went. Also want to acknowledge School Resource Officer Bollinger, who was out at Mary Casely Black Elementary and spending lunch getting to know students and building relationships with them. We're happy to have him with us. This is Miss Vanderheid's class, a fifth grade teacher out at Cray, getting ready for the Walkthrough Revolution, where students have to learn the historical person that they're playing and be able to participate in a game that they do throughout to learn more about the revolution. So great activity, lots of fun. Also want to acknowledge that the board made a decision last year to put one-time money over 2 years towards an intervention program. And so each school has intervention programs that are taking place with a teacher, and some support staff. And so this is an example of this is Mrs. Moe's class out at Brentwood Elementary, where they're working on some math games going forward. This is a collaborative learning time, one of those Wednesday activities, and this could never happen without some of our teacher leaders. So I want to thank Ms. St. Pierre, Ms. Leviachik, and Ms. Torres for presenting to their colleagues around this professional development around collaborative conversations. So it's great to see them out there. This is the time of the year where you see lots of holiday traditions taking place. This is Miss Barry's class getting pretty competitive with dreidel games. So fun to see them out there. And also at Cray, fun-filled family night. So there was stories and all kinds of activities that took place on Zoom for these families on December 3rd. And then also trying to have some of our old standbys in different ways. So this is the Winter Wonderland that was made for Brentwood Elementary's Winterfest. And so you can see that taking place out there. Sorry, sticking. This is like, I only took a still shot of this, but there's a video up online. This was Mrs. Jenkins's computer science class at Edna Hill Middle School. These students created with these Ozbots, they created these soccer players where they coded the soccer players to kick the ball into the goals. It was pretty cool. So a neat use of the Ozbots. Mrs. Fox's class got to join Jeff Kenny, very famous and well-known author of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He's reading and marketing his upcoming new book, but he did some drawing drills with them and gave them the chance to interact with them. I thought that was a fun activity. Out at Loma Vista, the fourth graders are learning about different cultural experiences, and they were able to get a professor, Professor Myers from UC Davis, who came out and shared multiple stories about Native Americans, musical instruments, and other cultural artifacts for a student assembly. So that was a neat opportunity. This is actually taking place this weekend, I think Friday and Saturday. Bristow is putting together the 33 Little Pigs. And if you don't get a chance to go see it, you can see that it's sort of in a classroom, right? And we're constructing a theater out at Bristow. So these are the last couple plays that'll be in this classroom before these students get a full-on theater to present their shows in. This is Mrs. Barbosa. She's one of our new counselors out at Mary Casey Black, meeting with their English Learner Advisory Committee. To do a presentation on the difference between being rude and mean and bullying. And this was at the Village Community Resource Center, who's partnered with the school to put on these kinds of presentations. So thank you to Village Community Resource Center and to Mrs. Barbosa for doing this. Congratulations to all these Adams Middle School Students of the Month who were selected for being selfless for that month's trait. And nice to see them being honored out here. And then also to celebrate the holidays, here's Candy Cane Lane, a drive-through event at Marsh Creek Elementary. And then this was just yesterday, Mrs. Miller, who's one of our teachers in our alternative education program, honored one of her students who was reclassified from being an English learner with a certificate and Jamba Juice gift card. So went out there with the principal to celebrate them. I thought that was great. And then this is what it looks like when toys are collected. So this was last night in the CD building as we were sorting and packing toys for the hundreds of families that are going to get them. You can see all the ones that have come in so far from the district and other community agencies. So literally thousands and thousands of toys. So really a special thing and a nice tradition in the community. And that's my report tonight, Board.
Thank you. The next item is board member comment, committee reports. Last week I had a transportation meeting, and at this meeting it was decided we gave permission for, and let me back up. Those who don't know, we share our bus services with Liberty, obviously us, Byron, Knightston, and who am I missing?
It's actually Oakley. Knightson has their own.
Oh,
they have
Oakley.
A small one, yeah.
And it was decided at the meeting that we gave permission to the person that runs the entire thing to go out and purchase a brand new bus with funds that were already in the account for that. So hopefully in the next 60 to 90 days, you'll see a new bus on the road maybe. So the other thing too, he also requested that he gave us a list of all the buses that were in service, and some of them have anywhere from low 300s to high 400s. So he was suggesting we speed up the replacement of buses, and he requested a increase in our, not ours, but everybody's share that goes into this. We requested him to come back at the next meeting with a more detailed report. It was also requested he continue looking for grants to replace some of the older buses with grants. I didn't realize it, but we actually have a full electric bus already in service, which is kind of interesting. So, and for those that don't know it, they're still short bus drivers, and The pay, just in case anybody's interested, starts at $19 an hour plus benefits. And that's depending on your experience, I guess, as a bus driver. And then at this point, it tops off at about $28 an hour. And then the big thing there is it does come with full benefits, correct? So those of you that might be looking for a job, give the transportation a call. Anybody else have anything to report? We also did go to a convention a few weeks ago, a Board of Education convention where we were taught new things by various people and so on and so forth. So that being said, we'll move down to public comment at this point. And before I take a motion to open it, does anybody else have one of these to speak? Anybody? Okay. I'll take a motion. Oh, you did? Somebody says, sure. I'm sorry. Awesome. Thank you. I'll take a motion to open public comment.
Move that we open public comment.
Second, please.
I second.
Motion and second. All those in favor of opening public comment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Public comment is now open. Just a reminder, remarks are limited to 3 minutes per person. You can see the big, huge clocks up there. While we encourage your comments, unfortunately, state law prevents us from discussing items that are not on our meeting agenda. Public comments can be made at this time or during the appropriate agenda item. We do take these comments very seriously, and if appropriate, we will have staff follow them up. The first person, Michelle. Can you guys hear me all right? Okay. Thank you.
You have just been served an official notice of demand. To summarize, as a school board, superintendent, assistant superintendent, and other, you have failed to exercise statutory mandated compliance and are hereby put on notice to comply with the following: Penal Code 23AA 273D, which are child endangerment laws, California Ed Code 4900583, 51101A7, 66252A, C, and D. California Constitution's Declaration of Rights, Article 1, Section 7A. Constitution of the United States, 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendment. 42 U.S. Code 3631 and the Nuremberg Code, and are directed to immediately halt all COVID measures in your jurisdiction, including but not limited to masking, quarantines, harassment, forced independent study or district homeschool, vaccine clinics, or any other related measures. We invoke the right to a safe school environment for all students. You have chosen to regulate this public school district with various COVID measures, preventing students from exercising the right to schooling free from control, which is a direct violation of Ed Code. California Penal Code 273AA and D. You will be held criminally and personally liable when you willingly subject, permit, or cause children to be placed in a situation where they are subjected to harm or genetic integrity is compromised. This can be punished with imprisonment in county jail for 1 year or state prison for 2, 4, or 6 years. Ed Code 49005.83 adds civil liability to your misdemeanor or felony when a physical restraint technique that obstructs a pupil's respiratory airway, a mask, is employed on your school premises. November 8th, Superior Court Judge Freeland's ruling stated there's simply no language in the guidance that directs, requires, or authorizes any school district to force a student into independent study program for not wearing a mask on campus. She also stated quarantine and testing guidance for students is only a recommendation. You are personally liable under the law, and you must commit this district to compliance, international, federal, state, and local. Prove compliance of any past, current, or future COVID vaccine deployment of all kinds. Any administrative procedures related to COVID measures on school facilities are immediately considered child endangerment and infringement on parental rights and a contravention of federal and state law. Per Ed Code, you have the legal capabilities to make lawful and legal decisions to eliminate COVID mandates. Your inaction to eliminate them, all previously mentioned, you will be deemed complicit in illegal activities subject to assault and child endangerment. I accept your oath of office to protect children. You have been put on notice. Kindly inform me within 14 days that you're going to respond and comply, or further legal action will be taken. My name's Michelle Blassie.
The second speaker is it Joanna? I can't read. Is that what it is? I apologize.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanna, and I am a parent of teens. I have nieces in your district, and I speak as a parent, an aunt, a concerned citizen, as well as a caring community member to our young children. I am also in clinical research in gene therapy. I speak I just like to share the latest information that is passed on by Dr. Robert Malone, who is the mRNA inventor, and I will quote him. My name is Robert Malone, and I am speaking to you as a parent, grandparent, physician, and scientist. I don't usually read and prepared speech, but this is so important that I want to make sure that I get every single word and scientific fact correct. I stand by this statement with a career dedicated to vaccine research and development. I'm vaccinated for COVID. I'm generally pro-vax. I have devoted my entire career to developing safe and effective ways to prevent and treat infectious diseases. Before you inject your child, a decision that is irreversible, I want to let you know the scientific facts about this genetic vaccine, which is based on the mRNA vaccine technology I created. There are 3 issues parents need to understand. The first is that a viral gene will be injected into your children's cells. This gene forces your child's body to make toxic spike proteins. These proteins often cause permanent damage in children's critical organs, including the brain and nervous system, their heart and blood vessels, including blood clots, the reproductive system, and this vaccine can trigger fundamental changes to their immune system. The most alarming point about this is that once these damages have occurred, they are irreparable. You cannot fix the lesions within their brain. You cannot repair heart tissue scarring. You cannot repair a genetically reset immune system. And this vaccine can cause reproductive damage that could affect future generations of your family. The second thing you need to know about this, the fact that this novel technology has not been adequately tested. We need at least 5 years of testing research before we can really understand the risks. Harms and risks from new medicines often become revealed many years later. Ask yourself if you want your own child to be part of the most radical medical experiment in human history. One final point, the reason they're giving you to vaccinate your child is a lie. Your children represent no danger to their parents or grandparents. It's actually the opposite. Their immunity after getting COVID is critical to save your family, if not the world, from this disease. In summary, there is no benefit for your children or your family to be vaccinating your children against the small risks of the virus, given the known health risk of the vaccine that as a parent, you and your child may have to live with for the rest of their lives. The risk-benefit analysis isn't even close. Protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other speakers, I will take a motion to close public hearing, public comment. Anybody?
A motion to close public comments.
I have a motion. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor to close public comment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 4-0. We're going to go down to consent items. I've already been requested to pull 8.1 from the consent items. So Dr. Eaton, go ahead with that, and then we'll take a.
Yeah, I wanted to, there's two especially special, is that the right word? Especially special, I just made that up, items on your personnel report tonight. And one of them, I'd like to reintroduce this person to you. We're at the point where we need to appoint an interim principal for Garin Elementary School. And I'm excited that we have a phenomenal assistant principal who's done a great job in our district for many years. She's been a preschool teacher, a kindergarten teacher. She's taught, I think, every grade except for first or second. I can't remember which one. I think it was first, because I think she was a second grade teacher. And she's been the vice principal at Pioneer since 2017. And it's my recommendation tonight that she be appointed interim principal at Garin, and that person is Allison Martin. And so, Allison, if you would just sort of stand and introduce yourself, say hi. And then there's also Deanna Langell, who's a wonderful teacher and a teacher on special assignment at Loma Vista School. I'm recommending her promotion to interim vice principal to take Ms. Martin's spot at Pioneer.
Is she here today?
She is not here.
Okay.
Yes.
With that being said, I will take a motion to approve consent items 8.0 all the way down to 8.5.
I move that we approve consent items 8.0 through 8.5.
I'll second.
It's been motion and seconded. All those in favor of approving consent items 8.0 to 8.5 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. All consent items have been approved. Congratulations. Uh, 9.0, hearings and appeals, we have none. 10.0, report out of closed session. I actually have two things to report out. A majority of the board voted 5-0 to approve a compromise agreement in Office of Administrative Hearings case number 2021100176 to resolve a due process hearing complaint filed by parents of a former student who asserted special education claims against the district. The board approved a resolution of all claims and demands in exchange for specific funding for the student's private services, private assessments, and parents' attorney's fees incurred in this manner. It's at this time I will take a roll call, a public roll call in regards to who voted. Stephanie, how did you vote in this matter?
Yes.
Twee?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I voted yes. And like I said previously, Emo Geddes was in fact at the closed session meeting, and he also voted yes. In a second matter, a classified employee has requested a hearing on proposed suspension without pay and dismissal. In closed session, the board acted to designate Attorney Scott Donnell to serve as the hearing officer. Mr. Donnell will submit an advisory decision to the board. This action taken is pursuant to Administrative Regulation number 421A. The roll call was as followed. It was 5-0 in regards to this matter too. Do I have to do a public thing on this too? A public roll call? No? Okay. That being said, moving along to 10.1, approval of the first interim report. And this is by Robin. Take it away.
Good evening, Board. This is one of the regularly occurring budget updates. As you recall, the governor starts with the January budget release. He updates that in May. The board adopts the budget in June, which is the budget adoption. The state completes their process in July. And then we do a first interim that's due here on December 15th, both by that to the board and then to the county. So tonight is a review of that budget and some of the factors that lead into where we are. First is looking at enrollment. We know that the purple line at the bottom is where we were last year. The gray line at the top was where we were in 1920. The green line is sort of our progress to date. And you can see we're still about 150 students below where we were in 1920 at the time that we're actually looking at this. And you can see one of the things I look at in 1920, really that's when COVID actually hit us sort of starting in February. And you can see that after really January, we sort of flatlined for attendance because we didn't see a lot of attendance change after that. And so it'll be interesting to watch the enrollment information this year as we go through the year to see if it continues to grow. So just watch. And the numbered stamps on there is the one is really, that's the snapshot across the state when districts take a snapshot of their enrollment and their demographic data and report it. It's called CBEDS. And that's the snapshot. That's sort of a comparable date that everyone across the state, all the districts across the state take that snapshot. Second one looks at second interim, when we're at second interim, and it's actually when we sort of take a sort of a final, they call it P2, which is sort of the final attendance for the year. And then at 3 is really in June when we actually do the true up the attendance on any changes that were made and close that out for the year. So just lots of things to come, but definitely technically better than last year. We're growing in enrollment, but we haven't regained where we were in 1920 yet. This is another look at enrollment. This shows all the grade levels outside of TK, which is only about 180 kids, so it makes the graph look kind of weird. So TK is not on here. The orange graph at the bottom is kindergarten. The darker orange sort of midway up is kindergarten and TK combined. And so everything but the black line are all enrollments by grade level, and that enrollment information is on the left-hand side of the graph. On the right-hand side of the graph is total enrollment, and that's the black line. And the reason it's interesting to look at that is when we develop the budget, we develop it based on our enrollment projections on the first day of school, and that's technically that first spot of the black bar. Then in the first couple of days, we gain attendance. Kids show up to school and then we enroll them. But then we also have a lot of kids, we have kids or students that technically move during the summer. And after about the third or fourth day of non-attendance and we follow up, those students those are dropped from our system. And then there's other processes to follow up on that. And that's sort of where that W sort of occurs on that second bar of the W is where sort of the lowest point. That's where we actually trued up the attendance and enrollment and dropped all the kids that are technically non-enrollees. And you can see from there, we've grown in attendance. We're about 70 kids up from the first day of school. And we're about 135 up from that low point. I use the first day of school because that's what we built our budget on. We built our budget on sort of what we thought on the first day of school. So when we look at enrollment growth, that's a factor to look at. And we'll continue to watch this. Related to enrollment is ADA. That's our average daily attendance. And that's what we're actually funded on. Our base funding comes from basically our ADA. That's the number of kids that are actually in seats. And it's basically a count all year. And we also look at that as a percentage. So what's the percentage of students that attend our class versus the kids that are enrolled? And if you look at 1920, when the state froze our enrollment after period 5, we're about 95% ADA. And at that time, we had more students in enrollment than now. This year, through period 3, we'll have period 4 here in a couple of days. Oh, 96%, yeah, sorry. That's almost 97. And 2021-22, where we are this year, you can see that we're averaging about 93.7% ADA. And what that means for us is we're still funded on last year because we're held harmless. It's the greatest of the two. So we're funded on last year's ADA, which was the same as 1920. Next year, we're going to be funded on this year or next year, whichever is greater. This year, even though our enrollment up, the ADA has knocked our total ADA down to about where we actually built our budget upon. Enrollment went up, ADA went down from our projections. So what I'm calling, we're even right now from where we were when we built the budget and the assumptions we built into the budget. What's important in terms of our assumptions in the out, what's important is that right now we're using about 95% ADA based on projected growth in enrollment to project our ADA for next year. And that will be actually higher than this year. So we'll actually be funded on next year's ADA, but it'll still be less than 1920. And then the following year, we have growth on top of that. And then we'll just have to watch what happens. There's lots of factors, as you know, watching the community around in terms of what's going on in the world that could affect that ADA for the rest of this year and even into next year. And we'll have to watch that very closely. And it's something very cautiously that the county and fiscal advisors are monitoring and making sure districts are cautious with what we do with that. And just as we look at that, when you look at ADA, we get funded based on ADA, and the funding sort of looks sort of like this, and it's really the bottom line. The bottom line, the May revise, is actually the numbers that we're technically still using because the governor and the legislature didn't change that after the May revise. So we got about 8,900 kids for every kindergarten through third grade student, about 8,200 for every 4th through 6th, and about 8,400 for every 7th through 8th grade student that's in attendance. And and you can see that if we had 9 through 12, or high school districts get about $10,000 a student. And when you look at, and that's just based in grade span. So that's technically looking at apples and apples for all districts. When you look at us for 1% ADA, for us about 92 students, if we lost 1 ADA or gained 1 ADA, that's equal to about $795,000. So you can see what 1% difference in ADA really affects us. As it goes down, our projected revenue will decrease, and vice versa if enrollment and ADA go up. And just the other thing at the top of the page is we're about 29% unduplicated. We've been averaging 31 to 32%. All meals are free for all students, so there's not really truly an incentive for the parents to fill out those applications because the kids get to go to school and go to free. The ones that are qualified automatically through what we call CalSafe, those students are also obligated and have access to other services through social services and et cetera, that they can get access to, but there's a lot of students that still don't apply. They get their free lunch. And so it's something that's affected us. It's about 75 students for us at this time, lower than what we projected in June. So looking at that, we're about 158 below where we were December of 2019, but we're up from the first day of school, which is, those are all good things, but ADA is down. So we're sort of basically net even. We already talked about it. Will be funded on next year's ADA relative to this and next. And then we need to watch the UPP. And really, I know there's conversations going on at the legislature relative to both ADA and the unduplicated count, because the rules are changing around us, and the LCFF is based on technically old rules. So we'll have to watch that relative to the reality of what districts are facing. Another factor that leads to the budget is looking at COLA. And the COLA, it affects us relative to our base funding. So we get most of our funding from the LCFF, which I'll come back to. And that's really this graph right here. These numbers right here are affected by the COLA. If we get a COLA, the base funding rate goes up. And in 2021, when we were working through 2021 and building that budget, basically the governor and the legislature said when we were actually in the year, we were going to get zero there and we're going to get zero in the out years. And everyone was looking at that. The districts aren't going to survive. Thankfully, and with realism around us, we know that the economy turned around much faster than everyone expected. And so through that, even through the 2021 school year, the economy around us increased, got a lot healthier. And so the governor, with those, was able to provide a 5% COLA in 21-22 and projecting a 2.48% COLA in 22-23 and a 3% COLA in 23-24. What's important is that is those numbers were used in our budget development. Those assumptions were built into the budget development that you see in front of us tonight. We didn't leave those out. Those are in there. The other piece I'll note is, remember, we didn't get a COLA in 2021, but we did have costs that went along with that increased. And if you look at it really across the board, if you add them all together, and sometimes math works, sometimes it doesn't, it's about we averaged about a 2.6 COLA over 4 years. Why that's important is when we turn the page, we have costs that increase on the natural. The first is STRS and PERS. So we have a state retirement system for classified and certificated staff, and employees of the state. And those costs have increased all the way back from about 2008-9, when we had the recession crisis that affected those those accounts. And so what happened over time, really, you can see starting in 15-16, is the STRS and PERS rates started to increase. And that's relative to what I would consider our unrestricted general fund. So it's really equitable in a way to compare against COLA. And that is STRS and PERS in 15-16, you went up by 1.95%. That means our budget increased in expenditures equal to about 1.95% of our unrestricted general fund expenditures. Because the COLA only affects the unrestricted general fund. We get COLA, it only goes against the LCFF base. That's our base funding. That's where our core funding comes from. Our SPED increases in 15-16, you can see were quite dramatic. And if you were here for about 3 or 4 years, we were seeing huge increases in the special education costs of our students, both in staffing costs, programmatic costs, and just the cost of serving some of those students. And you can see the effect of our budget, those expenditures increase. And really that's reflected in the contribution we make to the restricted. And then in step and column is our employees are on basically a salary schedule. They can move up, they can step up the salary schedule, or they can earn units and grow up and step up columns. And on the natural, and these are actually true costs for the most part, you can see that, if we look at 15-16 again, that was an increase to our unrestricted general fund expenditures of about 1.21%. You add all that together, just turning the page cost us 7.2% that year, looking at base funding relative to the core. And our COLA we received in 15-16 was about 2.3%. Remember, COLA affects the base rate, and the base rate is what we get per student. And you can see also that we were able in that year also to give a 5% raise. I'll add that some of those things, the other pieces that build into that story is we were also growing in enrollment, and the state was healthy at time, and Governor Brown gave us a lot of one-time money all of those years. Nothing like we got this year, but there was $3 and $4 million some of those years, $2 and $3 million all on top of that helped the district over time. And we started with a pretty healthy ending balance that has slowly been used up by deficit spending over that time. And so you can see there, if you run down to 2021, you can see that, turning the page cost us about 2.6%. We had a 0% COLA. We had some one-time money at the end of the year that we were aware of, and we knew what the COLA was coming, and you can see that. And then you can see in 21-22, turning the page was another 3.5%. We got no COLA in 2021. So you can see that basically over 2 years, it erased just the makeup COLA that we received in 21-22, and you can see how it affects the projection over the next 2 years. And I'll come back to some of that. It just looks at the story here is coming back. Well, we get to the COLA. Those COLA costs for us are usually covered or offset just by turning the page. And that's just a struggle that we have as a district our size with K-8 schools and a low UPP, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. Looking at assumptions, when we build the budget, both for the current year, building into the current year, and looking at our multi-year projection, which is what the county requires of us, we look at COLA. We look at ADA, we look at our unduplicated count, because that's what drives our core budget. We have a restricted budget. We get a lot of one-time money. We get other monies over there, but those are all restricted dollars that we can only use on specific things. On our unrestricted side, we're really driven by our core program, how we pay our teachers, how we run our programs, how we pay our utilities, all comes out of that base funding. The other thing which we've talked about before is we also have to look at the expenditures, and we know that we're going to have step and column, STRS and PERS, and special education contribution increases on a yearly basis, as we know based on history. Thankfully, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we've only seen the minimum in terms of what we budget, about a $700,000 increase in our contribution. And because of increases in special education revenue and the work we're doing, we've been able to maintain that. We haven't grown beyond that, like we were growing sometimes $2 and $3 million a year in special ed. So that's a positive thing. I'm going to knock on wood and give Jeff some kudos in terms of how hard his staff works. But it's something we have to watch every day because we know things can change overnight. The other thing I want to point out on this slide is on STRS and PERS. The governor and the legislature agreed to buy off or buy down or give schools credit and not have them incur some of the huge increases in STRS and PERS costs over the last couple of years. And we see that in terms of, you can see in 21-22, we increased by about $660,000. You can see next year that that relief goes away and we jump by over 2% total. And you can see that the expenditures we have to put into our budget as an expenditure line item is about $1.5 million. And then the next year, the planned payback process is starting in 23-24. The increases actually flatten out and we won't see increases. The reason we see increases, we know expenditures are increasing, and every time you pay an employee a salary, you get a percentage of it goes to STRS. So as step and column goes up, so do STRS and PERS along with that. So there'll be small increases that we have to monitor over time. And I'll note that we already talked that, there's some inclination or tea leaves out there that the governor and the legislature are thinking about a higher COLA in January. One of the other rumors are out there is they're going to provide some relief to districts in STRS and PERS contribution requirements next year. It's one of those things. It's a checkbox that I'm watching to see what the governor says in January to see if that really comes true. If it's true, and we get to do that at second interim, that's an adjustment we have to make to our assumptions, and expenditures in the out years go down. And again, that's 22-23. It's not this year. And really, essentially, based on my time and my experience in schools, at least in the last 10 years, even if revenue grows in the current year, we don't see anything that year. We don't see any of that money till next year, even though it was money earned this year at the state level. And I've already talked about this enough. I'm not going to talk about it. But if you look at STRS in the middle, you can see in 21-22, we're paying about 16.9 cents for every dollar that we pay in salaries. You can see that jumps to 19.1 and then it flattens out. And that's what I'm talking about. PERS right now continues to go up about a percentage a year still, as far out as we can see it. So we'll have to watch that. Assumptions continued. When we reached our agreement, we reached a negotiated salary agreement in June. We did that after the May revise, after the budget was developed and prepped for presentation to the board. So the budget that we had presented is what we knew in May. That was presented to the board. At that same time, we reached an agreement with our employee groups, which was about 2.3 in total. It's about 2.25 in salary and a % off schedule and some other costs related to health and welfare increases that totaled that. We reached that agreement with all the known COLAs. So that means the 5%, the 3%, and the 2% were all included in that multi-year assumption. We also used and agreed to use one-time money to offset deficit spending and to pay off the retros and the one-time payments. And we used out-year ADA growth, all built into a multi-year, because when we reach an agreement, the district, and you have to approve an AB 1200 report that goes to the county. And in that, we have to calculate the cost of the increase. We have to calculate where we are and how it affects the multi-year. And the multi-year has to be positive on the unrestricted budget in 3 years. And so we used all of those assumptions that we knew at that time, which is all the COLAs that are currently in the budget. There's been no change since June. We use all those things to make sure that settlement agreement worked. And to date, it's come about in terms of what we prepared and what we planned for. We used one-time money to pay off the salaries and the one-time money, and we're using current. It increased our current salaries, and we're using some one-time money this year and next year to offset that deficit spending to be positive in 3 years. So when we look at the unrestricted story, you've heard this before, is the unrestricted is really our core program. It's what we pay. It's what we run our base program out of. And we know what the adopted budget was, a 5.07 COLA, and was as long as the following years. And that basically helped us cover turning the page, both of this year and account for last year. And, the expenditures increase on the natural, and it did, at the time that we adopted the budget, it did not include any of the negotiated settlements. Those are all trued up in the budget that's presented to you tonight. There was more funding, in June, and we didn't really find out the details till after we adopted the budget, and the governor and the legislature agreed and actually didn't sign some of the budget line items until midway through July. Even though they're statutorily required to approve and adopt the budget by June 15th, I'll point. There was more funding, but the governor and the legislature didn't give us to in our core program. They gave it to us in what we call categorical programs. And the new money we received out of that excess money that was received through the state healthy economy came to us in very restricted categorical programs. An after-school program and some staff development money that can only be used in very specific restricted ways. So even though it was new money, we have to go put it in a pot and we can only use it for specific things over a certain period of time. Some of the other money that we'd already received that we were aware of in June, most of that, what I call COVID relief money, both state and federal, has been used to do programs that I'm going to get to in a minute. But we also use some of those one-time monies, as I stated before, to buy down or move unrestricted expenditures to the restricted side in one-time manners to help us make it for 3 years, knowing that those expenditures will come back. And that's the care thing that we have to watch for. Is when, let's say, and for example, we use one-time money to purchase or to move expenditures and transportation costs and some special ed costs that we had in the unrestricted. We moved those to the restricted side, and we were paying those for 2 years. After 2 years, when those one-time monies goes away, those expenditures come back to the unrestricted, and I have to include that in a multi-year. So when you look at 23-24, those expenditures are built back into the budget on the expenditures on the unrestricted side after those one-time monies go away. Just a reiteration is revenue for unrestricted is down about 70,000. Most of that is because of our decline in unduplicated students. And again, we don't really know what that number is until about now. And so we projected a number in June that was actually lower than last year, but it's declined more than we projected. Expenditures are up about $2.7 million on the unrestricted side in total. And that's really because of the negotiated settlements. And we've added some special ed legal fees that came into us at the end of the year and over the summer. And we're making, when expenditures go up, so when all the expenditures go up, our routine restricted maintenance gets a percentage of that. So when expenditures go up, the amount we pay to routine restricted maintenance goes up. So we had to increase our contribution by about $190,000. At the time, looking at that without one-time money, we went from deficit spending at June, where we were positive by $153,000, to deficit spending by about $2.6 million with nothing else changed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I move forward. And I've already talked about we used some one-time money to offset those unrestricted costs and address the the deficit spending. Looking at the unrestricted budget, just in 21-22, that's this school year in June, you can see we were projecting revenue about 84 million, expenditures about 64.2, a contribution. You can see where our revenue to expenditures was positive. That means we had more revenue than expenditures on an ongoing basis, not one-time money. Our beginning balance was about $7.4 million. And because we had revenue to expenditures positive, our ending balance went up just a little bit. Between June and now, two things occurred. Number one is three things occurred. The state adopted the budget. Number two was we reached the settlement of our employing groups. And number three, we closed the books from last year, finally, when we reported on unaudited actuals. And I reported at that time our ending balance increased because of some factors in special ed and some one-time money specific to that. And so you can see that at the end, the beginning balance at the fifth line down goes from 7.4 to 10.4. And those were all reflected in some of those things we talked about at unaudited actuals. But if you go back up, you can see revenue went down, expenditures went up, much because of what I've already talked about. Our contribution, if you go, stayed the same, and there's your revenue to expenditure deficit spending about 2.6. We then went through a process and identified some what I call large cost items that are single. Because if we move salaries over, let's say we move 50 people, I have to move their salary, I have to move all their benefits column. It's over 500 lines of code that my accounting department have to move. So we looked at bigger ticket items that were easier to move and easier to track. So at that time, you can see the expenditures went from 66.9 to 65.4. That means we moved expenditures from the unrestricted budget to the restricted budget, decreased those expenditures for short term this year and next. And our contributions went up, which I've already talked about. So in the end, our deficit spending was 2.6 down to 1.3. Our ending balance went from our beginning balance 10.4 down to $9 million. Looking at the multi-year, that story holds out. So in 22-23, revenue goes up because we also have projected COLA going up. But at the same time, we also know that we're going to lose our ADA next year will be less than what our ADA is this year. Excuse me for just a second. Chrome shut down? So you can see that when you look at revenue, revenue goes up by about $500,000. And really that's a factor of a couple of things. One is we know our ADA next year is going to be lower than this year, but the COLA goes up, a combination of things. So it's a net gain of a little bit, mainly because of the COLA, and we have a little bit of an ADA gain over this year, but not as great as last year. Expenditures go up, which we've talked about already on the natural. And you can see the revenue to expenditures next year is about 2.8, and that already includes about 1.5 in one-time expenditure moves. You can see our beginning balance starts about $9 million next year, ends at 6. We have about 4.25 required, so at the end we have about 1.5. In 23-24, you can see revenue goes up again. That's because we add about 100 kids and the COLA goes up. Expenditures go up. You can see we're still deficit spending in that year. And in 3 years, at the ending balance, after we reserve the 4.25, we have about $4,000 to the positive. And that's what the county looks at. They look at that. If it's positive, they look at all the assumptions we look at, which they'll do in this case, and they'll generate a letter. And so right now, that's part of the reason talking tonight is there's lots of factors that build into that. One of the things that we've talked about before, and is a factor on the unrestricted budget, is we're affected in a lot of ways. And this is looking at our unrestricted budget in terms of sort of expenditures as it looks at what's going on in districts around us. So if you look at the first column, you can see our C-beds, we're about 9184 this year. Certificated costs about, and this is just looking at the unrestricted budget, about 39 million, classified about 5.6, and total benefit costs of about 15.6 for total salaries of $60.5 million. Salary to expenditures is about 92.5%. So we pay about 92 cents on every dollar goes to salary and benefits in this district. And you can see our total expenditure is about 65 million. Our ending balance is about $9 million. Our per pupil LCF average, so you saw the three above, if I average that out, and it's a calculation I do based on total ADA and total revenue, is we get about $8,700 a pupil total. And our UPP at the time that we did this proposal, about 31%, we're actually 29. And this is pulled at first interim. When you look at the district around us, not for comparison, but you can see most of the other districts spend less than, sometimes considerably less than us, based on a dollar per salary. The other piece at the bottom, which is also an important that Dana talked about earlier, is our per pupil LCF. It's not our total revenue, it's the amount we get per child. We get $8,700 a child, and if we look at the other 5 districts that are on this list, and some of them are here and some of them are just comparables, is all of the other districts around us receive more money or considerably more money that builds into their core program. So they have more money per child to spend on their core program. And so there's a mixture of things. You can also see, just looking at, technically Oakley and Antioch, Oakley has a UPP or an unduplicated count of about 47%, and you can see Antioch has an unduplicated about 72%. Has a large effect on their base funding and what they get, but it's still a reality of how we pay our bills and what we do. Looking at the restricted story, so the other side of the budget is we have a restricted side where we have lots of accounts with very restricted purposes. There was some increase in revenue for special ed, which I talked about, because the governor and the legislature agreed to apply the COLA to special ed, which they very rarely do. They very rarely apply the COLA to categoricals, and they did this year. And there was huge increases in one-time money. That our legislatures got together and decided that they wanted to fund special projects. And all of those are one-time money, either short-term or long-term, and they're all new. So that means we have new programs to build based on top of the staff that we currently have. And technically, I'm not shying away from new money, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for, right? Another way to look at that, especially the COVID one-time money, is we entered a stage of emergency in March of 2020. And at that time, very soon thereafter, the governor and the legislature got together and pooled together a small amount of resources and gave us some one-time money at that time to help us overcome and offset the issues that we were entering and addressing the needs of our programs in our schools relative to the COVID outbreak. And remember, we didn't have kids in school. We had teachers working remote and et cetera. Then late in the spring, as they did the budget and they built the budget, they decided to cobble more money together and give us more money specific to addressing the needs of COVID, starting to talk about, hey, we need to have our kids come back to school and we need to start to do some intervention services. Then in the fall, as the economy improved even more, we got more money and they started talking more specifically about we need to do more help, we need to provide more programs, do all that. Then the spring of 21, just this last year, the economy was even better yet, and we got a lot more money with a lot of one-time strings, not added to what they did before. They created new pots of money and called it something else and added new strings, so to speak. And then as we developed the budget, the economy improved even more. They didn't give us more COVID relief money. They gave us new categorical programs, and they didn't increase to the base. Looking at the restricted side, in June, we had about $17 million with expenditures of about 42. And remember, we make a contribution from the unrestricted general fund that comes into and counts as revenue on the restricted side. So you can see that in June, we were projecting deficit spending about $5.2 million, but that's because we carried over a lot of other money. The $17 million is just new money that came to us this fiscal year. It doesn't count the carryover that we had because of all the one-time money we had to carry over. That's reflected in first interim. When we true that up, we get to carry all that money forward, which we couldn't do in June, and it trues it up. And we had some new funding, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You can see expenditures go up because a lot of the restricted programmatic money is we can't put in a pot of money and decide what we do later. We have to put it into an expenditure account and budget it like an expenditure. So if we book it as revenue, we have to book it as expenditure. Even though we may not get around to spending it during the year, we have to book it as expenditure. Then at the end of the year, if we don't spend it, we reduce the expenditures, we reduce the revenue, and we move that forward into the next year. I want to take a note right now. If you asked my accounting, if you asked the coordinating accountant, if you asked my coordinator of accounting, Melissa Guzman, bless her heart, she gets a lot of credit for the information you're seeing tonight relative to tracking and accounting. She's not a happy camper because the amount of accounting that has to go to keep this trued up. Revenue to expenditure, you can see decrease because basically revenue went up, expenditures went up, and you can see we have an ending balance that we're projecting on the restricted side of about $2.2 million. Looking at the multi-year, you can see that in 22-23, our revenue goes down because the one-time money no longer is reflected in the budget. We don't get to show that as revenue anymore. When we actually true up at unaudited actuals, we'll probably have some money that's left over this year, and that'll start to show up as revenue next year. And you can see in 23-24, all the one-time money is gone as revenue. But you can see, and the contributions from unrestricted is about the same because that's really reflective of routine restricted maintenance and special ed. And you can see the total with contribution revenue goes down over time. That's really because the one-time money is no longer there. We get it this year, and we just show it in the out years as expenditures and technically deficit spending. And you can see that expenditures this year about $50 million, they go down to 43, and then they go down to 39. Because how we have to book it is we have to show them as expenditures this year and the revenue, because the revenue and expenditures this year, we have to take those revenue and the expenditures away next year until we know what happens this year. So it looks like a drastic reduction. But when the one-time money goes away, so do the expenditures. So it's something we have to watch. And it's something that CBOs and accountants across the state are getting lots of gray hairs over, making sure we track all that correctly. And you can see that revenue to expenditure start to true up in the out years. And you see our ending balance in 3 years is about $2.1 million. And again, that's restricted side. And a lot of those are just a lot of pots of money that sometimes we can sit on because of the rules of the funds, and sometimes we don't. For example, the mandated professional development block grant is money we got this year, but we have 5 years to spend it. Again, you've seen this before. We have about 17 new programs. The thing I'll point out is look at 6 and 7 on the state side. Those are specific. Those are the new pots of money we received this year, and I'll come back to that. Looking at it from a different way, and you know, sometimes I do things that looks like it's really interesting, and I put it on paper. Sometimes it's not. But and sharing this is something that it was felt should be taught. Is if you look at just the COVID relief money, and it's specific to the ESSER 1, 2, and 3, and the state relief money that we received in the spring. If you total all that up, that's about 26% of our unrestricted budget. That's about $20 million for us. We've never received more than about $4 million anytime in any year in new money. What's interesting, and you know the struggle we're going through, one, to provide a 2-year plan and to do some of the other things we're trying to offset, deficit spending, et cetera. Not to compare and looking at Antioch and Mount Diablo, but if you look at Antioch and Mount Diablo, they received close to 45 to 50% of their unrestricted general fund. So they got almost twice as much in relative to us in one-time money, twice as much as we did. If we were them, instead of 20, we'd got $40 million. And we have a much different conversation about what we do with that. So it's a scale. And my point here relative to our peer pupil funding is the districts aren't funded equally anymore. Remember in June, we developed and approved a 2-year plan. That's the slide that came to you in June that both Michael and I and Dana walked through. And this is a slide from that June presentation that talks about the funding sources that we were aware of at that time and the total dollar amount that we were using to ensure that 2-year plan was working and to ensure the conversation we had to make sure our settlement agreement worked. And so you can see that pots of money. And really the one that I want to point out on here is the one at the bottom, which is ESSER 3. The federal government and the state shared that those fundings were come available, but we didn't have the information and the financial backing that we needed from the state and the county to put that in the current budget. So we knew it was coming, we could plan for it, but we couldn't include it in the budget. So the revenue for the current year in June didn't reflect those dollars. So you have to remember that dollar amount. The one-time plan talked about intervention teachers, counselors, summer school, intercession, paraprofessionals, and a mixture of things that most of those things we're doing now and we're implementing with great care and doing the best job we can to find the staff to fully implement those. Jump forward a year, we're now in the 2-year plan and looking at 22-23 as the second year of that plan. The budget still includes those intervention teachers, care counselors, and paraprofessionals for second year. Summer school can now be funded out of that new after school, before and after school program, which is included in our planning. Intercession, online tools, before and after school intervention similar to summer school. We have professional development block grant now supports our professional development actually over 5 years. And we're continuing some staff development issues, which is inclusive of implicit bias. And so that's still part of our budget, still part of our 2-year plan, still uses one-time money. So when we look at 2021, this is just a summary and a review, and we covered this in June when I went through the expenditures in detail, but as a reminder, is when we closed the books, that is at unaudited actuals, we ended up having a budget of about $10.3 million because we had to take away the revenue we didn't use. And we expended about 7.5 because some of the state money, you can't do that. You have to carry it over and show it. Looking at 21-22, we're showing for the ESSER COVID relief funds, just the COVID relief funds, about $9.4 million. To date, we've expended about 4.6, and that includes some of those one-time expenditures we talked about. It includes paying off the retro pay and the one-time off salary schedule, and our intervention teachers, our counselors are all funded out of these pots of money in the total at the bottom. The planned expenditures, the 3.1, when we have a contract or we have employees that are salaried employees, we pay them right now. We paid them through December 1st or November 30th. They're still going to get paid for the rest of the year. So their salaries are still booked as planned expenditures. So that's the planned expenditures are known expenditures this year, especially in the salary category. So we still see about $3 million in expenditures coming to us out of these COVID relief funds that the budget we have this year. There's also about 1.6 balance. And the best example I have is there's about it's about $690,000 in school allocations that's included in that. We allocated some one-time money in this year's budget out of the one-time money that got allocated to school sites, both for professional development and intervention services. And so of that 1.6, about 690,000 is already allocated and is specifically in school site budgets for them to this year and next year to do some of the work that they're doing, et cetera. So that leaves us about $850,000 left that we're looking at. Some of those things are in budgets that we'll spend this year. We know that with some of the issues going on with COVID out in there, we foresee more masks being needed or some of the cleaning supplies, and we don't know what may happen in this future. We may use those funds very quickly, or there may be funds left at the end of the year. If there is some flexibility in that, we have to watch because we don't know everything's going to happen. Now, as remember, I told you we had 2 pots of money. We actually had 4 pots of new money this year with very specific restricted reasonings. The first two you've heard about, the extended learning opportunity, that's the before and after school program, 9 hours a day, 30 plus extra days. We got about $1.4 million to expend that this year, and we're working through the programmatic needs to how do we build that and roll that out. We'll have some intercession going on in March, I believe, that'll start that. The Educator Effectiveness Grant, this is the professional development grant. There's an item on the agenda later tonight that will go into that more detail. We discussed that last time. We also had two specific budgets of money that the district received on behalf of special ed. One was dispute resolution, and that's really where you have disputes usually between students and the program about things, and this gives us some resources to address how we pay for those. And we know that there's some services that may not have been covered during the pandemic, and so we received some one-time money to help catch up. So we've already contracted with and actually using all of this money for extra psychologists, speech and language therapists, all contractors to come in and help catch up on assessments. So you can see we've about $4 million there. One thing I want to point out is the 4.1 there, and I'm going to go back 2 slides here on this one, all the way, third line down is the ESSER 3, there's $1.3 million. Remember, the ESSER 3 wasn't booked in June, and 4.1 here. So there's 1.3 and 0.41, that's $5.5 million that starts to explain the new money that showed up in the budget, as well as the carryover from the prior year. But these 4 budgets are the new money that came to us in this year's budget. In 22-23, these 4 budgets, which are really ESSER 3 and ESSER 2, because we have 2 and 3 years to spend those dollars, there's an accounting practice where we can defer revenue. All of the federal revenue, we don't get the revenue. We book it as a revenue, but until we make the expenditure, you submit the invoice to the state, and they send a check to cover the cost that we've incurred, and then you continue doing business. And because of that, we can actually defer revenue. We don't project to need those funds till 22-23, because remember, we have a 2-year plan. So in 22-23, we've deferred about $3.5 million in that COVID relief funding to 22-23. So it shows up in our revenue in the 22-23 budget, and it shows up expenditures in the 22-23 budget. And basically, our intervention teachers, our counselors, our paraprofessionals, and the money that we're using to offset the unrestricted general fund is about $3.5 million. $2 million for the teachers, the counselors, and the paras, and about 1.5 in addressing our deficit spending on the unrestricted side. So you can see that's already technically accounted for in that year, based on everything we know right now. And you have already heard that the governor the governor most likely will change the rules on us in January. One-time implications, which we've talked about. There's 17 new funds. We have to be careful what we do. The one-time implications is really being careful what you do, how you offset your deficit spending, and making sure those expenditures come back. We have to be very careful about that. And it's something we'll be monitoring as we go along. We know that we have new costs. We've added staff really in alternative ed. And as we've grown the program this year, we've had to add staff this year on top of the staff we already have. It's technically created a situation where we're overstaffed. And we know that special ed costs have increased, but at the same time, we've received additional revenue. And so right now, at this point, our contributions have not increased. I can't promise you that that'll be the same at second interim. Right now, it's looking okay, but we'll have to see, because you never know what kid will walk through the door or the needs that some of our current kids have. We need to watch our ADA and attendance, which we will continue to do. We need to watch what we're doing and how we're using our one-time money. The governor will release the January budget mid-January. The indicators are good. And then we need to watch any new funding that's going to come out of that and the requirements we have and what the rules are. This evening, I've presented the first interim, and it's presented to you for your consideration this evening. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I will take a motion to approve the first interim report. However, after that, I do have some comments that I'd like the superintendent to look into, but it won't affect the approval of the interim report. So all those, I'll take a motion.
Move that we approve item 10.1, the first interim report.
Second, please.
I second.
All those in favor approving the first interim report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0. The interim report is approved. Along the same line, Dr. Eaton, I would, and it has no bearing on Robin's work or anything like that, I'd like to make a directive, I guess it would be, for you to look for an outside agency to go over our books. It's been a long time since we did that. It's very confusing with the one-time funding and so on and so forth. I know, I think our labor groups would like to see something along that line too, because there's always some confusion there and stuff like that. And I'd like them also to look into a comparison with other districts. But it seems like every time we do a comparison, it's with our core group in this area. And I would like to see it personally with districts. They can do it for here, but other districts that have the same ADA money that we have versus somebody that's getting.
Comparative local and then comparative with
So
districts
that-
that are similar makeup to us.
Correct. Get an ADA of 8,000, like Robin was stating, around that thing where, compare breakdown of salaries, breakdown is maybe they can find some programs that they feel we could save some money on, or we're not utilizing enough, or et cetera, et cetera. So anybody else? And again, this is with my compadres.
Yeah, just to check, so that's a direction from the board.
Yeah.
I would,
Yeah.
just to piggyback on the program, just to check and make sure we're funding our programs in a fiscally responsible way.
And if you could
So it's
just,
just something that you're looking for to maybe have.
Is this something that you're looking for to have somebody come back and present to the board?
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And their findings, whether it's the
Okay.
same as what we've been told or different or
Yeah.
better or worse, whatever.
So typically, the outside expert in the state that any school district would bring in to look at that is School Services of California. So if that's the direction of the board, what I'll do is I'll work with Robin's department and we'll contact them and we'll bring up. So I have it looking at our books, comparison with other districts, both local and ones with similar makeup, looking at programs and making sure that our programs are fiscally responsible as we go forward. And it sounds like any suggestions for changes, I think, is what the board is looking for as well. Anything that we should do differently fiscally?
And like I said, it's been a while, and I think
Sure.
it would also, like I said, I think it would, the labor groups would maybe have more confidence in what the numbers are, or if the numbers change, or if there's
Okay.
extra money or something along that
Sure.
line.
And a public presentation of that. Got it. Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I'll communicate out to you that that's happening and what the timeline will be.
And then the second item along the same thing, and I was going to stop you right, Robin, I know it was long and I apologize, but you made the comment, since everybody's having free lunches, nobody's filling out the paperwork as far as the free lunches anymore. And I'm under this understanding, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, that also affects the funding for transportation too, correct?
Yeah, so we have per our agreement with our JPA, the students that qualify for free lunch actually get subsidized or free transportation.
Right.
And so we know that the kids that go and apply for transportation, the transportation department tells them that if they haven't applied, they come over and apply, or they come and get proof of that. So if they don't, or they haven't, then they lose out on some of those issues in terms of getting that free transportation.
So is there a way, another directive that we could make sure that they're filling out those forms regardless whether it's free lunch or not?
Well, you want to share what you've been doing?
Yeah, so we've communicated to parents. We've actually, what we do is we take last year's list of students that are current students in the district that didn't reapply. And we've reached out to some of those parents, and oftentimes they don't want to answer, or even after 2 calls, they still don't want to. So the staff that we have doing that really is apprehensive, because they really, they get a lot of feedback from the parents that they don't want to be bothered. So what Kristen and staff do is, when parents and students come in with the transportation issue, they work with those parents to work through that process, because they can still qualify them. It doesn't count for our UPP because that's the cutoff and timeline, but they still work those parents to get them qualified for free busing.
In fairness to the families, it's a very intrusive application.
Right.
It's asking for income level, and there are people that are uncomfortable with presenting it. And so in the past, it was the vehicle for getting a free meal is after a certain amount of time is you needed to fill one of those out to be able to do that. But because those meals are all free, it's not needed for that anymore. And so it is more difficult to get people to fill them out. And it's a statewide issue that they're going forward. I think it's probably going to be addressed at a state level is my guess. There are other ways to identify that percentage without having people fill out these applications going forward. And it's my hope that they'll do something like that. But in the meantime, we're, because all it means is that we have less money to support our students that are at risk when those numbers go down. And so that's why we're trying to do everything we can to get those numbers back.
Thank you.
That was actually, sorry, that was going to be my question was, is there another way to identify those people and for the state to get, I know the state has that information, so I don't see why they can't pass that on and still provide the funding without having to go through that intrusive application process.
Part of the catch is that the free reduced lunch meal is coordinated and managed by the Department of Agriculture, not by the Department of Education, not by CDE. So it's sort of a pass-through issues we deal with. So there's a delay, but clearly the legislature aware of this and looking at both how it affects our core funding and how it affects the kids that receive benefits. Because there's a lot of services out there for kids that qualify for free reduced lunch. They get access to the services that they can't get if they don't qualify. So that we know there's a double added benefit. And we share that when we talk to parents, and our secretary staff and our food service staff line item at the schools are ready to talk to any parent that comes up. But I know there's some apprehension, as Dana talked about. So we got to take a fine line. And what I've explained to advocates on my behalf that speak to the legislatures is that you're enacting activities over here that provide free reduced lunch. But over here, now we're having to reach out to your constituents 2 and 3 times to reach out to them. And we know that that's not a positive thing for either way. So we know the message is getting out. It's sort of a slow turn to get that turned with all of the bureaucracy that's mired in that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anything? Okay. 10.2, this is the approval of the BUSD Educator Effectiveness Grant Expenditure Plan. Woo.
Sorry about that. Good evening, board. I am back after presenting the Educator Effectiveness Plan in November to you. This is hopefully the time where this plan would be approved. A couple of things that I want to make note of prior to any questions you might have. One is I added in there some training for comprehension as per some comments that Stephanie made last time. And I also included outcomes in the plan that are written as learning targets or I can statements. Those are the way we write them in the C&I world. And so I included those for every planned activity. So those are the 2 additions that were made to the plan post the last board meeting. So unless there's any questions, I would ask for you to consider approval of the plan.
If nobody has any questions, I would move that we approve item 10.2, the Educator Effectiveness Grant Expenditure Plan.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All those of approving 10.2, BUSD Educator Effectiveness Grant Expenditure Plan, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0 passes. 10.3,
Thank you.
appreciate that. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get us out of here by 10. Suggested naming of BUSD alternate education program.
Well, this isn't as exciting as the first interim report, but I think it's very close. We're very excited to come here today and present to you a recommendation from a committee that was formed based on the board's recommendation at a previous meeting back in October. And so We had a great committee. President Dudek was on there. Emo Geddes, who wasn't here, were the two board representatives. Paul Slay, who's an alternative education teacher, along with Diana Lopez. Bree Haig, who's here tonight, who's the alternative education principal. Tarika Brown, who was one of the parents, and the most delightful member of the group, no offense, Mr. Dudek, was Avery Denson, who was a student with us. Nicole and I were also there, and really a great group looked at recommending a name to you for this school. You might have noticed in my presentation earlier that it was Alternative Education Program was the name of the school, which is hard to fit on a sweatshirt. And so what we'd like to do is really provide a recommendation to you. And it was a committee that worked quickly and really came after looking at all the recommendations that they received from outside folks. They worked through several names and came and are recommending to you Harvest Grove Virtual Academy. Mr. Dudek, I know you were a member of that. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything or share anything about the experience.
I was kind of amazed, like Dr. Eaton said, how quickly it came up. And Harvest there was two different variations of Harvest, and those were the two that kind of made the cut almost instantaneously on the committee. And we were proud of the name. We think it's a great name. It encompasses Harvest, Brentwood. It's kind of cool. So I strongly suggest that we approve this just because I think it's cool. We also decided that the principal will ultimately end up picking the mascot and things like that too, as it progresses. So but we gave her the foundation to work on whether it's a big corn on the cob or something. I don't know.
There were other suggestions too besides the big corn on the cob, but that was one suggestion.
That was.
Yeah. So anyway, that's here for your thoughts tonight, board. And then typically, like Mr. Dudek said, the principal would follow, working with her staff and families to come up with both school colors and also a mascot.
So with that being said, can I have a motion to approve the new name?
Motion to approve suggested naming of the BUSD Alternative Education Program.
And I'll take a second.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of renaming the school signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nobody is opposed. Your new school is called the Harvest Grove Virtual Academy. Congratulations.
Congratulations. 12th school in Brentwood.
I actually wanted it named after me, but it never got off the table. So moving along quickly, sort of. We're at 10.4, Measure B, projects and planning update. Take it away briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. I hear the hint in there.
There's 19 slides again, I see. So
These are exciting.
okay.
Just a reminder, the Bristow Theater's moving along. We have, it's a theater. You've seen some of these before. We have a full pad out there. We expected some groundwork to do on the far side to work on the parking lot. They didn't get there before the rain hit. So we'll be waiting for that. We expect the steel to arrive actually next week or first week of January, and we'll start to see real activity there. Adam's locker room is essentially done. There's still some punch list items, but the PE teachers are out and using the locker rooms and I'm pretty excited about that. Sort of a snapshot of the new floor and the lockers. So they're pretty excited about that. Sort of the outside of the building, those doors are now replaced with new. So moving forward, and there's still a couple of things to do, but we're excited about that. Other quick updates, we continue to work with our bathroom floor epoxy project. We have about 5 schools to go. We'll have one more done over winter break, I believe. We're looking at, we discovered that when we go to open up the locker room doors at Edna Hill to get some airflow, we actually can't open the outside doors on the blacktop because they've never received some privacy screens. So we're getting those planned to put the privacy screens in. We still need to meet with the site PE teachers just to make sure that they don't infringe on the blacktop, but then they'll have some privacy screens to be able to open those doors and get the airflow for some of the issues we have. We have some, I call it Edna Hill landscape. If you've been to Edna Hill, the far end, the portables have some nice dirt areas in front of the portables. So we're going to take that out and actually turf that with good drainage. So we have to stop cleaning all those floors out there with all the mud that walks in the room. And for some reason, middle schoolers find puddles immediately. So it'll also solve part of that problem. And lastly, we know we have some HVAC and heater work across the district that we'll be working on over time. Really quickly, another thing we're working on that builds into the work we do as a board, and you're going to see a lot more about this in January. This is sort of an overview relative to where we're going. You can see sort of the current projected enrollment for 21-22, and I showed you some information relatively to 3, 5, and 10 years out. And you look at 3 years, which is actually the July of 24-25, we're projecting to have a new school, and that'll open with about 372 kids based on what you know. But if you've gone around Brentwood and go on the Brentwood website, city website, you know that infill developments are popping up everywhere. So I'll have a lot more information for you in January. But, opening up the new school in 24-25 looks like it's going to maintain and allow us to maintain our facilities. And we'll still have some stretching issues going on, but we'll be pretty well along in helping address the needs for our growth across the district, and have a school that will grow in and be able to fill up over the 3 years with what we need. And you can see down at the bottom, the middle school grows a little bit, but not that much. And we're able to sort of address those. Because remember, 21-22 is well below where we were 2 years ago. So it's actually still below capacity now. Now, if you ask a principal, they're all full and they're packed, but we know that there's little gray moving areas everywhere in most cases. Related to that is what I call boundaries now. And we're not making a decision tonight, but I will take some guidance from you, but we'll be coming back to you in January on what I call a boundary conversation. We are not going to be bringing boundary proposals to you in January. We're going to talk about what it means to consider boundaries, what are the factors that lead into making boundary decisions, and we'll look at some factors and some variables that we'll get from you to then bring back some boundary conversations so we have the time to really think about it and vet it. In January, though, we'll need to look at 3 developments. One of them is the Amber Lane Apartments from across from Pioneer. Another one are the Silvergate Apartments, which are just right on Sand Creek and O'Hara. And we have really watching through the new developments to see if anything comes through that we need to address, because they're producing kids right now and they may become a new school that isn't going to make a lot of sense. So we'll come back to you in January at the 19th meeting with some recommendations. And that could be we assign the Amber Lane project somewhere else. We leave them where we are and look at it from an overflow. So we'll come back with you and talk to you about that. Be glad to talk to you offline to walk through some of that, but we tend to do it in public and talk about the factors and allow and facilitate a conversation. And at that time, we'll also talk about the timeline relative to the Lone Tree site. And remember, the Lone Tree site just represents where the school is. It's not what we're going to call the school. And we'll be bringing that information back on the 19th, including a further review of the demographic data. And we'll have the outside agency that does our demographic work actually come and share some of that and talk about some of the boundary issues. So you sort of hear it from a company that does this kind of stuff all the time. So just more to come. Another thing is that you look at Measure B is in 2016, we made you as a board made some decisions about the projects and what we're going to be funded. 2 years ago, we updated that. And this is sort of an update where we are. You can see that, we're still working through some emergency notification technology issues relative to getting our cameras upgraded for that. We're just about to finish our all access play structure, so that dollar amount will go away. And we're also there's still a little money in there in the theater planning budget. If you look at bucket 2, you can see there's the Bristol Theater, and those costs are there because they're just starting. We haven't seen the big costs come in from the theater yet. And you can see there's still a little bit of money left down based on what we set aside in terms of what we planned for the Adams and music through seating, which we're pretty much done with. And we have some core upgrades that continue on. That's HVAC and some of the groundwork that is not so shiny, but it still needs to be done to maintain our schools. What I'll point out on here is what we'll do is it won't be in January, but probably in the spring, is we'll come back and look at this much closer, because you as a board authorized the dollar amounts based on what we told the voters, and that's what the budget was built on. To change the budget, I need to come back and tell you, okay, we can reduce that budget because we're done, and that falls into a balance, and we can move that funds into another project. So basically, we'll look at that. And what it looks like is we're starting to look at bucket 3. We won't break ground for at least 9 months to 12 months, because that's how long it's going to take to plan and go through that process. And before then, we'll have a timeline about when we actually need to go out and sell bonds, and we'll have a financial update to you at sometime in the early spring. What I'll say, though, is that what the financial advisor is going to tell us is when to go out to sell bonds, because we know what's going on with the market. They're watching the market, and they're going to say, hey, we should probably do it in the next couple of months, because after the summer, the rates are going to go up, and then we're not representing the voters the way we should. And we'll also talk a little bit about what size of the bond we need to sell. That will all come back at that time, but we need to look at the budget first. When we look at bucket 3, in terms of what's proposed right now, bucket 3 is about a $47 million bond when we originally looked at it. And that means because the school's going to cost us about $57 million to build. That's just on our projected cost just to build the K-5 section of the school. We also know that we're still looking at a new elementary site, but you can see that's going to come out of developer fees. But the portion for Measure B for the new school is about $46 million. And you can see we have funding from other sources that are going to help build that school. And then we have some core upgrade costs that will come out of that bucket 3. So right now we're looking we need about $47 million to complete the bucket 3 projects. But we may have money left out of bucket 1 and 2 that can roll in there in terms of how do we cover the cost of that new school. But as you know, we have 2 more buckets that we went to the voters with, the voters approved, and we can't bring those projects up until, one, we can afford them, and we have the resources to do those. So either we have the money from projects that we completed under budget, or we're able to go out and sell bonds because we're under the assessed value rate and we can stay in a reasonable rate. We'll bring that information back and share that to you in more detail. But this is just a reminder, in bucket 4 and bucket 5, we have some portable replacement issues at 3 schools. We talked about upgrading our libraries to sort of 21st century, some multi-purpose and gymnasium improvements in floor and sound and lighting, and of course core upgrades. And then in bucket 5, we had shade structures. Well, shade structures were addressed in our playground projects and our solar projects. So we may look at removing that. I can't take it off unless I bring it to you as a proposal. And then there was the idea at the time is, if we have some large elementary schools, their time in their cafeterias are very limited because they got sometimes 3 and 4 lunches and they can't use the cafeteria for practice. So looking at like a triple or quadruple wide portable that you can put a whole class of kids to do practicing in, or PE, is something that we looked at for our large elementary schools. And then we had some core upgrades to sort of some across the sites that, that's that stuff that happens behind the walls that no one really, it's not shiny. So a lot more to come on that. It's just sort of an update of where we are. And again, I'm always able to talk and walk through these things with you and individually or in greater detail. The last thing that we're talking about is we have a Lone Tree site, which is the yellow area on that slide. And this is sort of the layout of the site in terms of Lone Tree is on the left. Smith Lane is on the bottom, actually on the west side of the project. And then Big Basin Drive is on the right-hand side. Really and this looks at the whole facility that we're planning. It's a K-5 part of the facility and then a middle school portion of the facility. This is the sort of what we call the intermediate grades with an NPR. Then you have the wing that goes technically up is sort of the primary grades. And we know with TK changes, we'll be looking at the restructuring of those rooms really in the TK and not preschool. And then there's the middle school portion. You approved a resolution in December to do an RFQ, which is complete. We've qualified potential bidders, and that'll go out to bid in January. What we're looking at doing is, because we're monitoring enrollment, a lot of things, is we'll go out to bid and the companies will come in and bid a K-5 portion of the school, and they'll bid the 7-8 portion of the school, 6-8 portion of the school. And we can decide when we actually award the bid how big the school we're going to build. So we'll have some flexibility and look at some options and look at the financing available, because what our financial advisor tells us and what our John Navarro, our CM, tells us is that it'll be cheaper to build the whole school at once. It'll be much more expensive to build a portion of the school and come back a couple of years later and build the other. It'll be much, much more expensive to the district. So we have some responsibilities, one fiscally to ourselves and the voters, as well as just doing the right thing. And the opposite that I'll tell you is that, we don't want to build a school that we don't have students for either. That's also something we don't want to get into. So and with today's environment, with what's going on with attendance and enrollment, there's just a lot we need to watch. And so we're going to do I think the safe thing and get a bid on both part of the projects and be able to make that a wise decision. And I'll give Steve and Emil a lot of credit. We've walked through a lot of this stuff and hammered out some of this stuff, looked at the pros and cons, and they've been involved in this conversation all the way along, and still a lot more to come. So that's my update, Mr. Dudek.
Thank you very much. Informational item. Dr. Eaton, before we go on, most of the remaining, and there's a lot more remaining, are procedural updates. The only ones left are these poor principals. If we could perhaps let them go home and eat cold macaroni and cheese or something, so.
If that's what you'd like to do, I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Good night. Unless you want to stay, but.
Think of us when you're getting ready.
I know, right?
Put your chips.
Congratulations to Allison and to Bree, to both of you for tonight. Yeah.
We'll save the cake for next time.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you. And a Merry Christmas if we don't.
Oh, yeah, Merry Christmas.
And we'll continue on with our video feed should any of them need to go back and watch it. That's our YouTube is continuing.
You know they're going to do that. Okay, so we have a 10.5 COVID-19 update.
Yes.
I'll walk through this pretty quick. Whoops, sorry about that. Let me do that again. So you see it. This is just pulled from today. Booster shots now available and recommended for 16 years and up as of December 9th. The California Department of Health today was the date to start the indoor mask mandate. And if you saw my 27 emails on that, there was some confusion around it. Is that initially they said that everything would be required to indoors to be masked. But then Contra Costa County came out today and said that their mandate actually supersedes what that mandate was. And so we're operating the same way we were before. So anyway, just there was a lot of emails wasted on that one because it didn't change. From Contra Costa Health, they've seen a 19% increase in the last 2 weeks of COVID. They haven't seen the Omicron variant in Contra Costa County yet, other than in wastewater sampling, which they do, but they expect cases very soon of that. Just a reminder, we have daily testing that's free available for staff and families and students. And this is directly from our website, so it's easy to find as you see it. And just sort of walking through the statistics that I pulled off from today. So you can see the per age group in the last 30 days. You can see that Brentwood has stayed kind of flat from our November board meeting. So it was 124 per 100,000 over the last 14 days in November, and now it's 125. So pretty similar there. Some ups and downs in hospitalization going forward. And then this, the Contra Costa Health Service still has this indoor mask mandate dashboard, though it's a little change going forward. So it has to now meet all of these criteria, which we have to be in yellow, we have to be below 75 in the hospital. We have to have 80% of the population vaccinated, which we don't have the yellow or the vaccination population, but we do have the hospital number below. And then it has to be at least 10 weeks after. And so I think we're 6 weeks now. We're expecting the end of December to be that. And now add an additional one to that is it has to be after January 15th, which is the California Department of Public Health indoor mask mandate. All this information, there's lots of great information on our website. And you can see each week we do a very transparent tracing dashboard that's up for students, staff, showing the totals and then the history of the month. And then all of the previous ones are back there. And thank you, Nicole, for continuing to put that out there. And that's my COVID update.
Any questions? Thank you. 10.6 update on the LCAP calendar and process.
Yeah, this is something that you see every year, board, and this is part of our this is part of our process for working on our goals as a district. We have a very collaborative process in looking at our overall goals that become on the board up there, and then also feed into our LCAP. And so on there, the plan is we'll have surveys that feed into that information. There'll be board direction given to us. We'll do a presentation to you in our first January board meeting with cabinet and talk about the data that we're seeing, the direction that we think we're heading, and then really asking for your input and your guidance and your direction. And then we'll come back to you the next board meeting and present updated actions and draft goals based on your guidance. And then we work through the strategic planning process where we have teams of representative teams from across the district that come together and meet over a couple sessions to look at goals, to look at data, and to further really impact the goals that we have going forward. In the end, what we want is we don't want binders that sit on a shelf that say strategic plan. We want goals that are actually enacted in the district. And really, we have limited bandwidth. And so whenever we choose to do something, we're also choosing not to do something else. And so we want to make sure we're very intentional about what we're choosing to do. So those workshops are laid out there, and then the process, and then this is a process that goes all the way through June and ultimately feeds our budget that comes to you for a 2-part vote in June. So that's there for your information. And we also typically have 2 board members that sit on that strategic action planning committee as well.
Sounds good. Thank you. 10.8, school project for utility rate reduction. And did I miss something? Oh, my bad. 10.7, which is the approval of resolution 2021-16.
Yes, this is a resolution that was that's put in front of you. It's considering to support Assembly Bill 75, which is basically asking the state to truly fund educational facilities, right? Historically, educational facilities are supposed to be funded with, it started out as being half state money and then half district money or bond money or developer fees. It's gone to more of a third. But recently there's not enough money in the coffers to even fund the projects that we have, meaning that even those projects, what you didn't see up there was us expecting state money to come in because we might not get it for years afterwards. And so this is some legislation that's being put forward to try to address that. And this group is asking for your support, a resolution supporting this bill.
I'll take a motion to approve resolution 2021-16.
I move that we approve item 10.7, resolution 2021-16.
Can I have a-
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of approving resolution 2021-16 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0. It is approved. Now, the next one is school project for utility rate reduction. Robin, take it away.
Yeah, this is just a renewal for the right for me to sign and continue for Spur to provide service to us for both electric and gas acquisition. Their service is providing savings to us because our gas rates are much lower than if we bought it through PG&E. And we know our utility rates, our electric rates are much lower based on the solar review that was done for us. So we know that's a good thing. It's one of those actions we have to do periodically just to renew that there are intermediary to provide that service for us. So this is an action item, please.
Oh, it is an action.
It's action. It says information.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I move that we approve item 10.8, school project for utility rate reduction.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving school project for utility rate reduction signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0. Approved. Approval of resolution 2021-17.
Yeah, quickly, I have a PowerPoint if you want, but this is just a yearly review of the expenditures we had for our developer fees, which is required. It's before you tonight for approval.
Thank you very much. This is an action item. I'll take a motion to approve resolution 2021-17. I'll take a motion to approve.
Motion to approve resolution 2021-17.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving 2021-17, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0 approved. Approval of the counseling waiver.
So you have before you tonight a waiver for Counselor Patty Barbosa. Patty is a longstanding teacher. Her last position with us was a fourth, fifth grade technology specialist, and she's been working on her counseling credential and has enough to be intern eligible and a waiver so that she can work full-time as a counselor. So we're actually thrilled. And she's a bilingual teacher and brings a lot of assets to this new role that she's taking on.
I'll ask for a motion that we approve the counseling waiver for Patty Barbosa.
Move that we approve item 10.10, the counseling waiver.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All that in favor of approving the counseling waiver for Patty Barbosa signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0 passes. Approval of 2021-22 collective bargaining sunshine.
So last month you approved the sunshine from the district to CSEA. This is CSEA's sunshine to the district in regards to the content that they wish to discuss at negotiations for the 2021-22 school year for your approval.
Thank you.
Move that we approve item 10.11, the collective bargaining sunshine with CSEA.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the 2021-22 collective bargaining sunshine signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. 10.12 is the election of officers of the Board of Trustees. The first one is for board president for the 2022 calendar year. I would like to nominate Steve Gursky for this position. Anybody opposed to that? All those in favor?
I think you need a second. Did you get a second?
Huh?
Did you get
I
a second?
second.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I wanted to make sure you got a second.
Oh, all those in favor of electing Mr. Steve Gursky as the new board president starting in January for the 2022 calendar year, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Gursky, congratulations. You are the president.
Yay.
And thank you, Scott, for doing such a great job this year in a
Absolutely.
tough year.
I
Appreciate it.
appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you very much. The next one is election of the board clerk for the 2022 calendar year. I would like to nominate Stephanie for that position.
I will second.
So I have a motion and a second. And those in favor of Stephanie becoming the board clerk for the 2022 calendar year signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations. Appointment of board representatives. Again, this is an action item. Currently, we have the East County Transportation Consortium. I would like to stay on that, please.
No objection.
And then Emo would also like to join me on that.
No objection.
Transportation committee?
Huh?
For the transportation committee? There
Yes.
only needs to be one.
Oh, I thought we had to have two.
No, we only have that one.
Okay, not a problem. Forget him, I'm on it.
You do have to have two for the XTs.
Yeah, those are the hard ones. Employee Negotiations Committee, again, I'd like to stay on that one.
Do you want me to say who's on it, each of them?
Sure.
So employee negotiations is Scott and Stephanie. Interagency right now is Twee and Emil. Education Foundation is Steve. Construction Committee is Emil and Steve. Diversity Committee is Twee and Stephanie. Current.
So
You're currently in negotiations. Do you want to stay in that spot?
she requested,
What's that?
You can have it.
Would you be interested in learning more about the Education Foundation? I've been serving on that board for many years, and if I was going to take negotiations, I would want somebody to step up for that.
How often do they meet?
Not very often.
Not very often right now because it's been difficult to raise money in the current environment.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I'll do negotiations with Scott.
Perfect.
Wait, hold on a second, unless Twee, you wanted to do the Education Foundation, if you have any.
I don't know.
Interagency committee.
I'll do it.
Perfect. Twee
I like to,
and then Stephanie. Twee and Stephanie.
Okay.
Very nice, very nice. Construction committee, I'd like to leave Emil and Steve if that's
I'd like
cool.
to stay on, please.
Emil and Steve it is. And then the diversity committee. Any takers?
I'll do it.
Twee. Do we have to have two?
well, I mean, I'll stay on it unless somebody else wants to.
Okay,
You guys, okay.
Great.
awesome. So I'll take a motion to have us approve all the people that just assigned themselves to different committees.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor of certifying the appointment of the board representatives signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations to all of us for filling those positions rather quickly. Filing of statement of facts for rosters of public agencies.
Just one of those things that you approve that's required at this time.
Move that we approve item 10.15, the statement of facts for roster of public agencies.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving 10.15, the filing statement of facts for roster of public agencies, all those signify by saying yes or aye.
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 That's the same thing.
And yes.
Opposed? 4-0. Authorized signature resolution, and that has to be the president and the clerk, or the clerk, both?
Yes, we just couldn't have you guys sign, so we'll have you guys sign after this meeting, so it's blank on your packet because until we do the next clerk that does the meeting, we can't sign. So we'll have you sign it after this meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have to, yeah? All those in favor of
You need a motion.
authorizing signatures for Steve?
You need a motion.
Sorry, you need a motion in a second. You need a motion in a second on that one.
That's true. I'll take a motion.
Motion to authorize signature resolution 10.16.
Second.
I'll second.
All those in favor of authorizing the signatures that we just discussed signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? 4-0. New signatures are going on the line. Consideration of nominees for CSBA Delegate Assembly. Tweety, you still want that?
Well, I served 2021 to 2023, so this one is for 2022 to
Yeah.
2024.
So
Oh,
this is they're 2-year terms. And so
okay.
if somebody else wanted to participate, they could. That's-
We'll leave it at.
But you don't have to. It's just up to if somebody wants it.
Okay, so we don't have to vote on not voting for nobody. Then we have,
What does that entail?
ask her, I
We
don't
can
know.
probably answer
Go
that.
to meetings.
Oh,
It's a day before, it's 2 days of meetings before the AEC, yeah.
then I'll send
And
it out.
then I think there's 2 days in May in Sacramento,
Okay.
like a weekend.
And it's an election, so you would
Yeah.
get nominated and then it would go out to
Yeah.
our region for a vote.
So we as a board nominate you, and then the delegate assembly has to vote on whether or not you can
Yeah.
actually join.
Go ahead. Sounds like a lot.
Okay. So it sounds like no.
Maybe next time.
Okay, maybe next time.
Sorry, just thought I'd ask.
No, it's good.
No. Did your research and came up with a sound decision. 10.18 is information. It's the first reading of board policy, board bylaw, administrative regulation.
So I think the only one we skipped was the California 10.14, which was the California School Funding Coalition. So this is the group that you belong to that's a lobbying group on behalf of getting more money into public school.
Regulation exhibit.
Yes, so this is a board policy for the first reading. It's 0520, which is intervention for underperforming schools, and it's part of the legislative change that you've seen in some of your recent ones. And so when the attorneys from CSBA are recommending that this policy also be included. It's awesome.
That was an information item, so thank you. Anybody want to put anything on the agenda for next month or any comments?
No, I'd like to thank you for your time as president. I know it's already been said, but did a fantastic job. Been a good leader, and I've done a great job running our meetings. So thank you very much for your time today.
I appreciate that, and I wish you all the luck next year, and hopefully things will chill out a little bit, but I'm not anticipating it, but we'll see what happens, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Steve said, and thank you for bringing some humor as well. Much appreciated.
Makes up for my non-education, so I'm rolling. I appreciate it, thanks. Tweety, you want to say something nice? Okay, moving along.
We'll give you the 20 after the meeting.
Leave Twee alone. She signed up to be the delegate.
There you go.
She was working hard there. Plus, she's Rotary president next year, so.
The next special board meeting will be held on January 12th. I'm assuming that's the reschedule of the principals?
It's the cabinet.
Oh, this is the cabinet one. Okay, my bad. And the next regular board meeting will be held on January 19th, 2022 at 6 p.m. Just a reminder, for January 19th, that's my birthday. So feel free
My child's birthday as
to,
well.
yes. So feel free to bring myself gifts. I will accept anything.
You're gonna bring your own gifts?
If I have to make myself look good, so. All right, with that being said, sorry to keep everybody here longer, but the meeting is adjourned, and look forward to everybody next month, and everybody have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas.
Get through this.
Thanks. Don't forget to sign Nicole's stuff.